So there's some huge news coming out of Nigeria. A brand new tax act for 2025 has just been passed. And listen, this isn't some minor update. We're talking about a complete overhaul of the entire system, rolling dozens and dozens of old laws into one single piece of legislation. So what on earth does this mean for your wallet, for businesses, and for the whole Nigerian economy? Let's get into it.
Okay, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the big picture. Why was this massive change even necessary? Then we'll make it personal and see how this new law could affect your taxes. After that, we'll jump over to the business world and check out the new rules for Nigeria's absolutely vital oil industry. And finally, we'll tie it all together to really understand why this act is such a big deal.
Just try to imagine for a second that you're trying to run a business in Nigeria. You'd have to deal with a whole maze of different tax laws, one for your company's income, a totally separate one for VAT, and then another one for capital gains. For years, that's what it was like, a really complex, confusing patchwork that was just a headache for everybody. Well, this new act is meant to fix all of that.
And this slide right here, it just says it all, doesn't it? On the left, you've got the old way, a long, messy list of separate tax acts. And on the right, you've got the new way, just one single unified law. The idea is so simple, but so powerful. Create one central source for everything tax-related, no matter if you're an individual or a huge oil company.
Okay, so a single, simpler law? That sounds great in theory, but what does it actually mean for you and your bank account? Let's zoom in and look at a couple of the key changes that are going to have a direct impact on your personal finances.
Now, this is really interesting. For the very first time, there's a new tax relief specifically for renters. You can now deduct 20% of your annual rent from your taxable income, up to a maximum of 500,000 naira. That's a brand new tax break that could be a really big deal for a lot of people. The new act also rejigs the personal income tax brackets. So, the first 800,000 naira of your chargeable income, that's your income after all your deductions, is now totally tax-free. From there, the rates climb up to 25% for the highest earners. It's definitely worth taking a minute to look at this table and see exactly where you might fall. All right, let's pivot and talk about businesses. The new Tax Act brings some pretty massive changes for companies, and it's especially fascinating to see how it treats the smallest businesses versus the absolute largest ones.
First things first, the Act gives us a super clear definition of what it considers a small company. Any business pulling in an annual turnover of 50 million naira or less. Now, you'll want to remember that number because it unlocks a pretty incredible new benefit.
So, what's the amazing benefit for these small companies? It's this number right here, 0%. That's right, 0. The income tax rate for small companies is now 0. This is a huge, huge incentive designed to give a major boost to those small businesses that are really the engine of Nigeria's economy.
Okay, so that's a great deal for the little guys, but what about the big players? Well, while small businesses are getting a major tax break, the new act also makes sure that the largest corporations are paying their fair share. It's a move that we're actually seeing happen in a lot of countries around the world.
It's called the effective tax rate, and it's aimed at multinationals and any company with a turnover of 20 billion naira or more. You can think of it as a kind of safety net or a minimum tax. Basically, if a huge company's tax bill, after all the clever accounting, ends up being less than 15%, they'll have to pay a top-up tax to get them to that 15% floor.
Okay, next up, Nigeria's oil and gas sector, the absolute heart of the economy. The new Tax Act introduces two totally different tax systems for oil companies, and which one you fall under all depends on whether you've signed up to the new Petroleum Industry Act or the PIA.
So here's how that split works. If a company is still operating on an old license, they just stick with the old tax rules, the petroleum profits tax. But if they're a new company or if they've made the switch over to the new PIA framework, they're going to be taxed under a totally new system called the hydrocarbon tax.
So what does this new hydrocarbon tax actually look like? Well, it's got two main rates. For most of the oil production happening in onshore and shallow water areas, the tax rate is 30%. But for newer exploration projects and in a few other specific areas, there's a lower rate of 15%, and that's really meant to encourage new investment.
So, we've dug into how this new act affects you, me, businesses, and the oil industry. But what's the grand vision behind all these changes? Let's just take a step back and look at what the government is trying to accomplish here.
The main goal really is to swap out complexity for clarity. By just getting rid of all those dozens of old, confusing laws and creating one single rule book, the hope is to make it way easier for everyone to pay their taxes, and for the government to collect them. It's all about modernizing the system and making things more stable and predictable.
So what's the bottom line here? What does this all mean for you? It really comes down to one word: certainty. Whether you're trying to plan your family's budget for the year or you're a CEO deciding where to invest millions, having a clear and predictable tax system makes all the difference in the world. And that is exactly what this new law is trying to deliver.
And that really is the big question, isn't it? On paper, this new law looks like a massive step in the right direction. It's ambitious, it's comprehensive, but will it actually deliver on its promise of a clearer, more stable, and more prosperous economy for Nigeria? Well, I guess only time will tell, and you can be sure that we'll all be watching very, very closely.